Camera. Yeah, there we go.
There it is.
There.
We are live. So,
Hey,
John,
hey,
good
great,
morning.
Abel. Good morning.
It's great to see you in in LinkedIn and other places.
Yeah.
Um, as you start to stream in, welcome. We're going to be talking about the C-suite and AI. And as we get going, John, one of the things that I was thinking about this morning, I was reading up about Jeffrey Hinton and Demis Hassabis, and I was reading I was reading a interview by Jeffrey Hinton, and they asked him if he was a physicist, because he got a Nobel Prize in physics, and he said, "No, I dropped out of physics because the math was too complicated." So he says it's really odd that I'm now being given the Nobel Prize for physics. But perhaps that illustrates some of the opportunity when it comes to, what's taking place in the world of software. Any reactions to that, or
Yeah.
what we're living through?
No, I mean it's clear that in Demis Hassabis, right? He's in
Yeah.
DeepMind, and they went out. Basically, they have to protein folding
Yeah.
that I don't think is in his resume. That he's pretty much a computer scientist. He cut his teeth on using AI for gaming. Um, but then gets a Nobel Prize, and deservedly so. That it's absolutely amazing how good their tool is. That I believe it's discovered something like 95% more proteins than anyone knew about before. And so, I mean, it's clear that AI is going to have a huge effect in many areas, and certainly ChatGPT has shown that it's applicable not just in a narrow domain. This is pretty generalized in its capabilities. What's your sense there, Abel?
No, I think that's one of the amazing things. I was thinking through, what we were going to discuss this morning, last night, and I was looking at big changes in technologies. And one of the things that surprised me was that the human genome sequencing took 13 years and $2.7 billion. And now you can do it for $100 and it only takes a few hours. And so I think these tasks that used to require nation state level funding and tremendous deep expertise are now being made available through technology to the average person. And I think that's going to ripple through our organizations. And part of it is that mindset. I think that we can apply it at the margins, like, sure, let's not change anything and make it a little bit better. Or we can start to reconceive, or there's even the possibility of the one person company. So, how do you think about
Yeah,
these big fundamental ground shaking changes?
right. I mean, I was looking at SpaceX and capturing the rocket, which I thought was amazing. That
Yeah.
you can launch into space and then come back to within a foot. That's pretty amazing. And then I went on the web and I found out there were some teams from universities that had done the same thing with not toy rockets, but s- small
Small.
rockets
Yeah.
that only went up a few hundred meters. But they were just using the same kind of AI technology, and it was a group of about 5 students. And so I think we've seen this now, the last 20 years where we've been operating in the software area, that small teams work, that you don't
Yeah.
need hundreds.
Yeah.
That so my sense now is as well with Copilot, for example, the software development process, it was revolutionized with DevOps, so that started in 2010 and has been kind of rippling through the whole industry. So we now, understand agile and understand basically how to operate in an environment that's very uncertain. We talk about the VUCA environment where, everything, we've got high uncertainty, we're operating quickly, etc. And that hasn't really percolated through many institutions or companies. We've got our own experience here in MIT that it's difficult to get change. And you think a university would be a place that would be fairly easy to change, but it turns out, it's not. And if we look at our C-suite, and what they're doing, they're tied up with, very different things to thinking about how to apply AI. What do you think? Does that spread to other companies, you think, Abel?
Very much so. And I think one of the challenges is that, as we were discussing just the other day, that companies exist to deliver a value that they were organized around. And they have optimized over many years, right, how to do that. And so it's a little bit like comfortable jeans. You know how they perform. You know exactly what to expect. Or perhaps shoes. I was trying to buy shoes last night, for a trip that I'm going to take, and I'm thinking, is this a good idea or not, right? Because I don't know these shoes, but they promise, all these things, right? And so when it comes to organizations, the same thing is true, right? Our administration, they have to deliver classes. They have to make sure they're compliant with all of the requirements for grants. They have to, figure out the property around the institute and how they're going to grow and so on. And then, there's this possibility of some contribution by some, shiny new technology. And so how do we make use of it? And, there's a bunch of different approaches. And one of the things that I've used as a, sort of starting point is what we have learned from the world of DevOps, right? If we think about, say, 14 years back, 2010 forwards, and Eric Rice and Lawson
Gene
from
Kim and
Gene Kim and Crowd and those principles and how they might apply here. And as I think to the Phoenix Project and these books, what from those do you think translates over to generative AI, John?
Well, it seems to me the software recognized pretty early on the customer was changing. The way that, like you're saying now, you're buying shoes and you're probably buying them online. That everything has moved online basically. That I mean, it's not entirely true. Nordstrom is still doing pretty well, and some companies
3 different pairs.
Just
to make sure I got the right size. So yes, I ordered online of the same thing, right?
I got to say, a friend of mine in high school, when he worked for British Telecom, and he had to go to the Middle East to negotiate, apparently, to collect the money from international telephone calls. This was 20 years back, and he bought new shoes. Anyway, he got there, and there were 2 left shoes in the box. So he had to wear them. And he said forever after he was known as the man with the 2 left feet in. So
it's one way to make a statement, right?
He was remembered.
Yeah.
So no, but I do think, generally our companies have been organized for predictability. One of the things is that we have fixed roles. That's C-suite. It's you have your area of expertise. That's what you're in charge of, and it's kind of fixed. I mean, the whole structure was I call it the factory model. That it was about organizing efficiency in a factory. That almost like Ford, that you were trying to optimize, you're trying to cut down the stock that you've got on the shop floor, the Toyota production system, you're trying to get just in time. And our whole structure has been very much like that. Whereas what we found with software teams was that, we wanted to get the developers and the people deploying, the ops people together. And in fact, get rid of those separate titles. That we wanted to empower somebody to see the whole pipeline of, from development right the way through. And, we talk about shift left, about trying to solve the problem earlier. That now with software, it's turned out that we can deploy, minimal viable products, or we can test products, do A/B testing fairly easily. It's not clear that in other areas we can do that. So I think there is perhaps something special about software, but it does seem to me that what it's recognizing is that we're living in this fairly unpredictable world where we need to test our ideas and, test them as fast as we can. And I think that's the thing that Eric Rice got right in, lean startup, that it's kind of, one, don't write code that you don't need to, that, check if somebody else has already got it. And certainly in the software area, I think the greatest uncertainty now is about, okay, which packages do I use? And I think in AI, part of the problem is we don't have solid platforms there yet. Even OpenAI, that's probably the leader, it's not a complete platform. If we go to Microsoft, that's their partner, they've got a lot of tooling there. It's tough to see, okay, is this the platform I should develop on? And what's your take there? Because I think, we're spending our time building code, basically. We should say both Abel and I write code, not necessarily every day, but certainly every week. So we're kind of touching the AI stacks pretty regularly. Abel, what's your take on what's going on?
No, I think that's an excellent point, because in some ways, part of the question for leadership is stability and how mature is this technology. And, if I think back to the 2000s, the era that software became commoditized and platforms emerged like Microsoft and others, people used to talk about the LAMP architecture, right? Where you had Linux, you had Apache, you had MySQL, and you had Perl or PHP, right? And a whole generation of software was built on that. And it was well known, it was well understood. A tremendous amount of web, technologies were built that way. And then 2010 came, around, and, cloud technologies matured, and you had that plus an other set of, complementary technologies that have continued to evolve until the present. But if you think about where we are when it comes to generative AI, I think the prototyping stage is clearly here, right? There's great tooling, either from the cloud vendors or from the open source community, to be able to get going. But then as you start to build more, you start to sort of see the needs of what should be there, right? Where are you going to put your vector database? Where are you going to get your sanitation of what people ask of the LLM? Because, part of what you're trying to do is not get your LLM jailbreaked. And what I mean by that is, getting it to give you offensive information or something along those lines that impacts your brand or impacts, your organization in another negative way, liability and so on. And there are a number of additional components, right, that you're going to need. And where are those going to come from? And who's going to provide them? And how mature are they? And how are you going to test? And so all of these questions start to surface themselves. And, very large, capable organizations can deploy teams, much like before the LAMP architecture was, solidified. And they could build all this additional tooling. But most companies want to pick components off the shelf and bolt them together and go to market. But, where are we on that? Where do you feel we are on that, John?
No, I think you make a really good point that the LLM is just one part, that really we're building AI systems where that's a component, and already with Chat GPT, there's this other piece that's sitting in front of the LLM that's recording your prompts. I can go back to last week's prompts that I was making, and basically there's the whole, what you'd call the context window, is recorded there. and I can reload that and start again. Now, once we have these two components, basically that's a very different game now, because the front end has, full access to the cloud. So it's got nearly infinite storage capabilities. You can have petabyte files that front end piece is accessing. And also it can go out to any API across the world. So when people are talking about, making rules for how we're going to control this AI, it's one thing to make a rule about the large language model itself, that we could align and have that well tested. And as China is doing, they're making sure that they've got 40,000 questions that it has to be tested on, so they make sure that it's not going to talk about the party in the wrong light.
Yeah.
But that's just one part. As soon as you add this other part, the front end piece, that now you're talking a very different game of testing that. And we'll be deploying systems that are accessing multiple LLMs. That there's no reason why you should limit yourself to one. Except that that's easier to test if you've just got one. But you can reach out then across the world and hit any LLM you like. And I think that's the worry with, they're saying, okay, as long as we can switch these systems off, everything is fine. That, we can turn off the super intelligence. But it's clear with blockchain technology, we know how to build systems that can't be turned off. That, China took down the whole of their their Bitcoin miners, and still Bitcoin, the network operated quite efficiently. So I do think that we have to view these things as systems, and then they become, a little bit more difficult to test, or a lot more difficult to test, but the capabilities that we can then produce, and as you're saying, already we can produce agents, we can drag and drop 10,000 files now into a RAG system on OpenAI that will answer questions and be pretty well aligned only to use those documents. So as I think we've already got systems that we can build that are really useful. I think the future is, big question mark. And we've both read the book, The Coming Wave, by Mustafa Suleyman. That is an excellent, I think, he does a really good job of kind of laying out the potential issues, which are significant. And you mentioned Geoffrey Hinton. He's raising the flag there. But I do think that, we've got a long way to go before we reach that deadly. Well, when I say a long way, we've got a few years at least, I think, maybe two.
So, by the way, thank you for your comments and questions. And Eriko Yamamoto brings up a fascinating question that I see often. How is it that the C-suite can make decisions and prioritize initiatives and maximize value, given that they don't have the background, right? And how does that take place? And one of the challenges in general is, how do you gain their trust? And how can you make a strong argument for what you're advocating for? And this is true in cybersecurity. This has been true for CIOs for a long time. And I think part of it is that as technologists, we speak a different language, right? We stand up and we talk about efficiency, and we talk about APIs, and we talk about, seconds of delay, latency. We talk about all these other things. And what C-suites in general are focused on is, what is the value, and can you quantify it in business terms? And many times, and if you read the literature, the one I was referring to, the Phoenix Project and so on, they have this character named John, nothing to do with John Williams. That's just his name. And he's
I'd be flattered.
he's the prototype security person, right? That nobody invites to their meetings because he's a blocker and nobody likes. And, he's just always threatening people and, doom and gloom that if you don't follow all the security things, the company is going to go to hell, basically, right? And many times, the CIO will come into the C-suite and make similar type of arguments around technologies. This is so great and so on, but they want a hard business, presentation. And you need to speak their language. And over time, they need to meet you halfway as well. This is well documented in Schwartz's book, The Art of Business Value, where he walks down this road and he talks about the opportunities, and even business value itself is something that's continuously being redefined, right? Because as John often mentions, the world is changing faster and our opportunities are different and they are changing quickly, right? And so they need to be agile. They need to get the fundamentals of technologies and why it matters. And we can talk about what some of those could be. And the technical teams, the technical leaders need to also get on board. They need to understand strategy. They need to understand business value. And so when it comes to that, it's an education process that's not going to happen overnight, but it's a journey you have to travel. And I would argue that any modern organization that's going to respond to challenges and take advantage of opportunities needs to go through that process. John?
Yeah, I mean, Alvaro asks a good question, and you've partially answered it already, Abel, about creating value. And I think, again, Mark Schwartz does a great view of, asking the question, what is business value? That it's not so easy to pin down. But it is clear that at the moment, I'd say that there are certain kind of systems that we can deploy pretty quickly that are aligned. Here I'm referring to RAG systems where we give it a system prompt and tell it, only answer from these documents that I'm uploading. And our experience with those is that it does a really good job of staying aligned. It's answering from those documents. It'll actually quote the document that it's, getting it, or the documents that it's getting its answer from. So it'll cite. And we can also develop chatbots pretty easily. And, again, make sure that they're aligned by good prompting and management of that prompt. So with a lot of these systems, I think most companies will be, creating their own overviews that they can capture all the prompts being made, say, to the chatbot, so that you can filter out, any malicious prompts. Similarly, with the responses from the LLM, you'll want to be filtering those yourself to make sure that they comply with, exactly your business goals. But my sense is that those kinds of systems you can turn out pretty quickly today. And I think that a lot of people are getting hung up on the problem that now and again, you can get hallucinations. But my sense is that you can still develop a lot of products that have value without having a perfect system. You can see that already with Copilot. Copilot doesn't, or until recently, didn't have access to up-to-date libraries. So often was answering maybe a year behind the state of the libraries, but it still revolutionized how we develop code. That I'd say, I can't imagine any developer today operating without Copilot. Maybe somebody down at the doing binary code, but most of us are using Copilot every day. And it's quite incredible how good it is at giving you an overview of the kind of code that you want to write. That's where I find it most useful. Is it's very good at structure. It's very good at architecting. It's seen so much that it'll give you a great architecture for your code. And, that code may need to be debugged, but again, it can help with that. Abel, what's your sense about actual products today?
Yeah, I'll comment on that. By the way, lighting is funny because the sun's coming through my window. It'll pass in a moment. But I wanted to say that the capabilities are such that it is changing how many things are done, and the cost of experimentation is being decreased. And I'll give you a specific example from the classroom. I typically assign a homework to our residential students here at MIT around sense making. And I ask them to scrape data of course catalogs for universities without any knowledge of what this is, right? And so you basically pull down this thing that looks like nothing and you have to navigate it. In my premise to the problem is you need to understand what's being taught in universities. And so I want you to scrape a number of these, right? And it's challenging and they can get through it. And it's something we've done in the past. Now, add ChatGPT and they could do this in minutes, right? And so I said, okay, fine. Now take this course catalog from the 1920s, which is really just pictures, and figure out how to do that. And these tremendously bright students, all of them, the full class, didn't know about a vision API that exists that can essentially do the exact same thing and perhaps even simpler. But the reason I raised this is one, to sort of highlight what we can do today, meaning they could go through the 1920s catalog that it was all images and extracted data and formatted and presented to you in a structured way, which was great, right, for the analysis they needed to do. But two, oftentimes is difficult to understand what the market is offering because you simply don't know it exists. And so this process of discovery, John and I are basically, this is our job, right? The process of seeing what's in the market, what the research developments are, and what maturity it has. And we work with industry closely to see what really what's real and what's just marketing. And yet, in this context that I gave you, capable individuals were frustrated, right? Meaning for a week because they were trying to do it with traditional vision systems, which can make some headway, but they're not that great, right? I mean, this is the type of things that cities use to be able to scan license plate, but that's a very well-structured problem. This was a course catalog that, had just free-form formats and you're trying to look at images, right? And so I think this new era, right, where you are not just consuming technology, but you're having to understand the emergence of it. It's one that presents an even faster clock cycle, right? And so, John, I wonder if you might want to say a little bit about, the different approaches that people are using from from a management perspective or a discovery perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to give the example, of the way that, we've been using it. But what I would say is that you get a very different perspective if you're using it every day, that you get much more comfortable with how it's going to respond. You get better at structuring your questions for it. I give the example of writing a children's story where I tell it, or I ask it, I say, you need to produce a book on a children's story. What experts do you need to involve? And it comes back and it comes out with, okay, you need somebody for plot. You need somebody that specializes in character development. You need a writer. You need a critic. You need an editor. You need an illustrator. I hadn't thought of all of these things. It's one area, I think, where if you haven't used it, you think that it's for, details. It's not. It's very good at strategy. It'll come up with a strategy, and if you prompt the correct way, you can execute a sequential workflow quite easily. It will go through those steps. Then you just turn it around and say, okay, now write the story, playing each of these experts, sequentially yourself, and it will play those experts, and basically do, you might call it chain of thought, that it will reason really well, and the critic will critique the writer, and it's the same LLM that's playing both the roles, but it does an amazing job. And I think there's so many areas where it just makes it easy to write proposals. Anything to do with the written word. And I was reading one of Schwartz's books this morning, Abel, and he points out that our companies are structured for repeatable processes, and the way that they get those repeatable processes is that you have to have this paper trail of how that decision was made. And what strikes me now is, producing documents for paper trail is easy. We could write a proposal now in 1 hour that would have taken us days. It really just changes your perspective on, you realize, hang on, that the systems and the processes that we've got in place now in our company don't make sense. And I think this is Mark Schwartz's perspective, that he's saying, look, these technologies now, you're going to depend on them for your existence. You can't ignore them. You can't pretend that they're just services. You have to engage them at the highest level. And I think, as Abel was saying, unfortunately, there's a communication problem. If you haven't used these technologies yourself, it's going to be difficult for your engineers, your data engineers, to actually communicate with you what they can do. And so I think ultimately it is a people problem, that we're operating with hierarchies that were designed for a different era. In MIT, hierarchy was designed 100 years ago at least. And we're living with it, though it doesn't really make sense anymore, that we've got these different departments. But it's clear that the problems that we're trying to solve cross departments. And I think this is happening in companies now to a large extent, that they're struggling because their organization is not, it's not designed for the problems that we're facing today. Would that be fair, Abel, to?
Yeah. So let me comment on that. I'm one of those persons that sort of fits the stereotype of being very structured in the engineering side of things, and that likes to do its research and takes a long time coming to decisions because of it. So when I used to travel, 20 years ago, I used to do my maps and deep research about any city that I would visit. And, I'd have to start like 3 days before. And, when I got there, I knew exactly what to do. And I have all these sheets of paper and so on, to help me. And, I was sending John a picture of somebody navigating with an actual paper map. And my wife and I would travel. And if you remember that far back, they've been married that long, you might remember, one's the navigator, the other one's the driver. You're trying to, read this map, and exits are coming at you very fast. And it's chaos, right? It's messy. And if you think about it today, right, you can navigate smoothly, with a display that is just telling you, get ready, and half a mile, you're going to exit to the right, get on the right lane. And the visuals are showing you, depending on which platform you're in, exactly, what the lanes are, and, magnify as you get closer. And it's such a pleasant experience, right? And I think some of that, when it comes to how are you going to navigate organizations, it's what's taking place here. John and I often wonder, we work with some of the top consultancies around the world on technology, yet some of the leadership, not all, is still operating in 1990s vision of technology. And, the question that I sent John, when I had these pictures side by side, I said, are you navigating with a paper map? Meaning asking from leadership, right? Is this the scenario you're in? And I made myself some list of things, for example, that organizations could be using right now one of the first ones that I thought of was synthetic and virtual influencers. Are you leveraging that to be able to advocate for whatever position you're trying to do, even within your own company? John and I spent some months developing the pipeline and workflows to be able to create digital avatars. And we're here, by the way, and I always have to prove it, put something in front of my face just because that's hard to do with the AI. And it's something that, could transform, especially education companies. Yet you can see that this is far off in the horizon, and there's a number of other things that I could do. And part of it has to do with that sense of what's possible. And so one of the things that I would advocate for everybody to do is to live with it. John and I use ChatGPT, and it doesn't have to be ChatGPT. It could be other capable platforms as well. But we use it every day. And I find, I used to say I use it at least once a day. And I started to count, and it's more like 10 times a day. And even if you're just using it as a sounding board, it is, like John said as well, I don't think I could go back to living without it. So I see that tremendous barrier, but a lot of it I see as well has to do with mindset and understanding of what this actually is. And I think that knowledge, part of it will come through education, but other has to come through personal experience. You start to see the world different as you start to use this. John?
Yeah, I mean, I was telling Abel that I was talking to a person that was basically within the C-suite of a biotech company, and it's a startup. But they'd raised something like $300 million. That in biotech, that's apparently not that much. But he was asking about data analytics on their clinical trials, and I knew nothing about what his company was doing. But he gave me the name of the company so I could look up the drug that they were testing, and I could ask GPT to basically tell me, write for me a clinical trial for this drug, a phase 1. It did that, 10 minutes. It said, okay, this is what will be measured. These are it basically wrote the kind of proposal for that clinical trial. And it's very much aware of, exactly how clinical trials have to be structured. And then I asked it to do a phase 2, and also to create synthetic data for me so I could understand, what this person was doing. So within an hour, I'd say, I'm certainly not an expert, but I could grasp what that person was talking about, what he was struggling with in his company. Now he explained to me as well that exactly how drug companies function, that basically once they've got the drug approved, they only have about a year to make a profit. If they haven't done it by then, somebody else will have leapfrogged their technology. So my sense, and not sense, that it's pretty clear that the clock tick now in a lot of industries is much faster. You look now at the fashion industry, it's got a 6-week cycle, something like that. I like to order the same thing if it's comfortable. Often you can't get it because they've sold out of the whole stock. And now they've got a new design. So my sense is that we're up against, a faster clock tick almost across the board. And we're having to make decisions when, we don't have complete data. This is why I think, John Boyd and the OODA loop is very relevant here, that you've got to move. Even though you don't have a great plan, it's clear to me that almost every industry needs to pick up generative AI, because, the latest GPT-4o1 now is better than most PhD students. So it's answering questions across astrophysics, quantum mechanics, biology. It can answer questions that most PhD students can't. So to me, this is that we talk about, have we reached the singularity, or when will you reach the singularity? In some areas, it's pretty clear it's very good, and we use it now at the strategic level, not at the necessarily the detail level. Now it's very good at details. It'll write your proposal. You know, people criticize it that it has a certain style. You can change that. You know, with a system prompt, you can tell it, you know,
Yeah.
be more aggressive or be more, you know, concise. So you can control it to a large extent, and it's, you know, it'll speak any language. As Abel was saying, both of us have now got our digital avatars, and it's much faster for us to make content with a digital avatar to speak it than for us to try and record ourselves in front of a camera. And we were laughing about, you know, a production like this a year ago, we'd have had to go to a studio. You know, we'd be sitting in a studio for a whole morning, probably
Yeah.
having to practice and get things laid out. I mean, the technology is getting amazing, and it's changing. I think it's going to change the structure of companies. I think that's where we're kind of getting bogged down, is that we're operating with an archaic structure. We're operating, you know, where we've got these strict boundaries in place. You know, that no, you shouldn't be doing that. You can't think about that. That's somebody else. I think it's not like that these days. I think it's much more like a biological system. You know, the ants running around. That it's not necessary for this top-down command and control structure in the way that it used to be. We can come to that because I think that's a more radical. It's a little off this topic, but Abel.
No, I think that that's a fantastic point, John. And in some ways, you know, we're struggling with change, right? I think part of the challenge of our era is that the principles we navigate the world with, you know, the paper map, is changing faster and faster. And I think our ability to absorb those changes, we've reached our limit, right? There's many things, and I know this is sort of heretical in some ways to say, but think about all the inputs of information that you have into your life and ask yourself, how current are you in those? Right. And I think if you're honest with yourself, especially if you move in a fast moving, if you work in a fast moving field, there's no possible way you can take it all in and be current. You know, if you think of the early days of personal computers, you know, I'm talking about early 80s, right? You could cover everything. You know, I'm talking hardware layer above, right? Everything that needed to be done to be learned in a couple of years. You could learn the entire surface of it, right? And today, if you open up the hood of your car and you look at the engine, it looks like a computer, right? You don't understand how any of those pieces work, right? And so, you know, we have to take a different approach. We have to use a different mindset. And, you know, those of you who have taken my classes know that I like to show this graph where I show, or this illustration where I show a library and I say that the average person reads 750 books in their lifetime, but there really is, you know, 130 million exist. And that's, as a percentage, that's practically zero. But when it comes to generative AI, I did want to flag a number of things that I think are important to for people to know, those of you who are new to technology or generative AI. And if I go down the list, you know, there's content production that it can help you with, there's product design, there's customer support and virtual assistants, there's automated code generation, synthetic and virtual influencers, personalized recommendations, legal and financial document processing, inventory supply chain optimization, customer research, co-creation with customers, and it goes on and on. And this is just, you know, some of the highlights. And essentially, I think I'd like to echo John once again that you don't really understand how good this is. You know, he talked about, you know, PhD level until you start to work with it and push it. And when you start to push it, you start to develop your own communication. And this is a little bit like working with a human team. You know, as you push it and you learn what it can do and how it's growing in certain directions, you'll get more and more help from it. And I think we're just at the first steps of integrating this into our lives. And we often say to each other, I don't think people understand, to what depth this can help you. So, John.
No, I was just reflecting, Abel, this morning to prepare for this. I was sitting on ChatGPT. I was asking it, okay, what's the tech news today? Now Chat goes out and searches the web. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's using Bing behind the scenes, but this is a big move because I always used to use Google.
Yeah.
And, suddenly I'm not using Google. That this is a major shift that, now it summarizes for me. I said, what's the news in finance? In tech, it was talking that Joe Biden apparently now has declared that AI will not be used to launch any nuclear, missiles, weapon systems. So that's that in some ways, sure, that's a no-brainer, I'd say, that you wouldn't want to put it in charge of too many things at the moment. However, it's pretty clear that it can be deployed, I think, for a lot of automation tasks. And one of the comments, Enrico, I think it was, or Alvaro, that it can already be deployed for automation tasks. But the question mark is, how is it going to change your business at a strategic level? Because it's pretty clear that it's going to have impact. Abel and I have been thinking about education, and it's very clear there that we can already construct an avatar that's better than us, that has wider knowledge. Both of us, we've been making these recordings for the last
10 years.
8 years or so. So we have a few thousand recordings each that we just fed into the AI system and said, this is what we know, answer questions from this. And it can answer questions from that, but it's already, as Abel saying, it's read 100 million books that we haven't read. So my sense is that we can already tactically deploy it. The question is, strategically, it's going to be different in different industries, but it's a generalized tool. So my sense, anything to do with paper, it can be replaced. I was just thinking of your analogy with maps, and I think it's a great one, Abel, because one of the things we question is, so what do people really need to know about this tool? And my analogy is the GPS system, that, very few of us know how the GPS system actually works, but we use it every day in our car. That, every day, and I don't even have to, tap in where I'm going. It says, I think you're going to go to work today, or you're going to go to this, Cafe Nero. It's pretty amazing, I think, how it'll be integrated into our lives. And I do think, though, that society is changing. I'm thinking back here, they did a test in Microsoft and asking engineers to come up with ideas. 60% of the ideas were not good ideas. So, this idea of testing things fast, minimum viable product, iterating quickly, I think that's the way to go. And certainly it's cheap to, dig into OpenAI and Gemini as well. And, the Llama series, they're all pretty accessible now, and they're going to get even easier to use. I do think RAG systems are a big deal. Abel, maybe you want to talk a little bit about RAG system, because I think they're useful now.
I'll mention RAG, but actually I wanted to touch on something that Lana just brought up, as a question. And, the resistance that she mentions is something that I see over and over. As you know, I like to read the Wall Street Journal, and I look at FT as well. And consistently, since the public, introduction of this technology last year in January, there's been a consistent, stream of articles saying this is too dangerous, basically. And it reminds me a lot, as you've heard me say, to cloud, that, essentially many companies said everybody else can go there. We can't because of, whatever criteria. And, 10 years later, everybody else is on it. But what calls to mind as well, on Lana's point, is the importance of tech expertise at the C-suite level. And unfortunately, in many companies, and both John and I have spoken at CIO events and conferences here in the US, and the CIO, the Chief Information Officer, is a pure manager, to such a degree that in many organizations, they recognize this fact and they bring somebody else, a chief digital officer, to try to change the company. And whenever I hear that, I hear the clear bell. Okay, this is a C-suite that is pure management and not technology. And I think part of it is you have to start to live with the technology, as I mentioned, because unless you incorporate it into your life, and going back to the map question, it's a great, I say, story to work around, because, if you use it, you start to think about Waze, and what is Waze but customer data? And you start to think about the amazing things that it could do. In the early days, it could find streets that weren't on any map, official map. Why? Because people were traveling and they could figure out that there was a road there, right? And you start to figure out, the importance of it and the strategic importance of this technology. And so I think getting people, or trying to lobbying, say, the C-suite, to use this in their personal lives. And my recommendation for those of you who have taken my classes is to incorporate one per month, to your personal life. And this is something that, again, it's not going to change overnight, but to do it, over time, and that you do need an expert. And I can't say this enough, in the C-suite, somebody who can help you see that roadmap, not the paper map, but the new map, right? And over time, I think, try to win, and you have to contribute. Again, Schwartz, we've mentioned it several times. You have to contribute. You have to contribute. You have to gain their trust. You have to be strategic. You have to speak the language of business, but you need to be deep technically. And I think that makes a huge difference. John?
Yeah, I was just thinking that to some extent, cybersecurity went through the same problem, that, C-suite didn't have any expertise in it. And certainly, today you should have on the board of directors, there needs to be somebody that knows tech pretty well. But it's, I was thinking to a bank in California, that they estimated that one ransomware attack cost them, I think it was over 700 million. Now that wasn't just the price of the ransom; it was the cost, loss of business, etc. But I mean, these things are existential threats, and my sense is that, the AI is going to be used by the attackers. That's for sure. We're already seeing deep fakes. That my wife was complaining that my avatar, she couldn't tell its voice from me. So I actually backed off, and I'm using a voice in my avatar, which I can recognize is not me. And I think these problems, they're beginning to address them. I saw that Google is going to flag photographs that have been enhanced. So there's going to be more transparency as to what AI has touched, because you can tell today there's just these amazing photographs that people are posting, and you go, I don't think that's real. And you're pretty sure that, I mean, Photoshop is getting so good now that it's revolutionizing things. But what I would say is that this is the beginning. And I mean, this has only been going a year and a half, and already we're seeing these monstrous strides forward. You know, we're talking about context window length, for example, that it started at 8K words that you could put into the context, then 32K, 128K. Gemini now is up at 1 million tokens, and I've experimented with 10 million. So it means you can dump a whole 45-minute video into the context window of an LLM and ask it questions about that video, and it does a pretty good job answering. So I do think that, you know, we think, or I tend to think of it as being text-based, but it's, you know, it's good at photographs, it's good at video. Sora, for example, for video production. Companies that are sending out 100,000 individualized videos to their employees, and basically targeting, you know, their hobbies. And so you can do things now, and, you know, you're mentioning selling on the web and influencers. I mean, I met a friend of mine. I didn't actually know what he did, except that he drives a sports car, and we have that in as like a hobby. But I asked him what he did, and he said, "Oh, I sell on Amazon." I said, "Oh, that's interesting." I asked him, "How many products do you have?" 20,000. He runs focus groups just to learn what people want to buy. He's telling me what he runs one on wines, for example, just to discover what do people want. He has 5 million followers, I think. So it's a different world out there, and, you know, we need to go through this fast testing cycle again. Back to, I think, you know, both lean DevOps and Eric Rice's book on lean startup. I think he has some great advice there. Abel.
So we're getting close to the end of the hour. Thanks for sticking with us. This is our first one in LinkedIn. We plan to do more. There's so many topics and so many discussions that we'd like to dig deeper into. I did want to say here before we close that we did see the ethics questions that a few people brought up, but I'll only say this for now, that when it comes to AI in the C-suite, which is, you know, what we focused on today, there's a couple of questions, and in general, this is what people, you know, bring up. One of them is philosophy, and that we can debate, and we have as humans for thousands of years. And the other one is compliance, and this question is very much like that the bankers, the banking industry faces. And so in that sense, I think there's going to be a number of different compliance challenges throughout the world. US, depending on how the elections go, may go one way or the other. Europe already has the EU AI Act, which is, I think, ahead of the game for most countries. But as a leader, I would focus on that. And there's a lot more to say, but I'll stop there. John?
Yeah, I mean, I think on top of that as well, I'd add, think about how you're going to test. You do need to test your systems. Think how you're going to do that. You need to automate the testing, because these systems are not that easy to test. People like Azure have Promptflow and other tools that will help you with testing, but you really do need to make sure that, you know, what you're deploying has been tested pretty thoroughly. And what I would say is, you know, keep up with what's happening, because the field is moving very fast still. There's a lot of research being done. There's some great papers about, you know, as the context length grows, you have to be careful, because it doesn't always improve the answers. That it seems like there's a sweet spot there, about 100,000 tokens. After that, it isn't clear that it improves it. So we're learning still about how these systems perform. But what I would always, you know, say is that use them now, because it'll already change how you view this whole area. It's not a passing wave. I saw a comment there that, you know, the C-suite saying, "Oh no, this will just pass." For sure, it'll pass in some sense that we'll get used to it, but this is like the World Wide Web. The changes will be rolling through for the next 10 years. That we're just starting on this, and already it's exceptionally good. Any last words, Abel?
No, I think I'll end it there. That's a great one to close with. Perhaps I'll say what Bill Gates said in the early 90s. He said the internet was a fad, not much publicized, but he did say it. Don't worry about it.
Sorry, that's like the IBM. Only 5 machines will be in
right.
the world. You won't need them. Yeah. So
thanks for turning up. Feel free to comment, send us suggestions for topics. Perhaps next time we'll run some polls just to get a sense for what people are interested in. And we'll see you on the next one, and we'll post once again on LinkedIn when we're ready. Take care, everyone.
Thanks very much, everyone. Great questions.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and close.
Definitely, we shouldn't finish on chief legal officers.
yeah, we'll leave that for the next one.
Leave that for the next one.
Yeah. Take care, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and end the stream.
Okay. Cheers, Abel.